There are many reasons out there that will convince you to not read a book, and there are even more reasons on why you should invest your time in a book. Some will say the benefits outweigh the costs. What more can you ask from a book than its compelling storyline and enduring lessons? Well, Double Victory, A Multicultural History of America in World War II by Ronald Takaki could do just that. This book focuses on how World War II was a war to fight for our freedom, but it also incorporates how those same freedoms were not given to many minorities that dedicated their lives to this war. We will focus specifically on the role of African Americans during the wartime and how this minority factored in on racial tension.
I usually don't read that much, but I like to read like adventurous books and like books about like dystopias, like the Hunger Games.
Although some history books can be long and dragging, Double Victory does cut to the chase. Because most of the book is from first-hand accounts of the minority people who played a part in the war, it has a lot of dialogue to move the reader along, and to give the reader a direct understanding of what occurred. Some might wish that World War II was a dream, and that it never happened. But it did, and it changed American history forever. The bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, did indeed spark the rise of war. People were on the edge of their seats, and they wanted to do something about it. Immediately, Americans began to show their patriotism by enlisting in the war. One example would be an African-American man named Smell Black.
I was 21 in 1941, and we were celebrating. My good friend George was very patriotic. He says, "Let's have a drink. Here's to Christmas in Berlin and Easter in Tokyo." He joined
Although
up
whites
right
and
away.
blacks could join the military, it would remain segregated. In 1940, President Roosevelt issued the Selective Service Act, which prohibited colored and whites to associate with one another in the same regiments. Roosevelt's decision provoked anger across America and ignited a protest for democracy. In addition to this, colored soldiers were treated differently. African Americans weren't allowed on the fields and forced to take on service positions. They were given tasks such as cleaning the officers' rooms and the latrines, and even dangerous jobs such as bomb loading. Training programs for men were also segregated. Even the New Deal was no help to African Americans. Programs like the Agricultural Adjustment Administration only supported white farmers and workers. Again, the NRA did not even protect black workers from discrimination in employment and wages. Unfair employment came to 75%, of war industries refusing to hire blacks. The battle against segregation in the army was one thing, but the battle off the job was another. Hate crime was very evident. African Americans that represented America in the war were still subject to beatings and lynchings. In addition, when cases like these were being investigated, those seeking justice could not find any reports on the incident. So how can we fight as a democracy when people are not seen as equal?
I don't like it because I usually have to read like a lot of passages, and it's hard to like understand for a long time. It seems boring most of the time because I feel it's not that relevant.
As African Americans fought to be able to work in the defense industry, white civilians still sparked hate crimes. Eventually, the tension grew so much that full-blown riots erupted in cities such as Detroit. At first, what seemed fueled by the new immigration policy was now fueled by rumors of white sailors throwing a black woman and her baby in the Detroit River, and a black man raping a white woman in Belle Isle. The campaign for justice by African American soldiers, industry workers, and community is all relevant to recent times in our history. The events in Ferguson, Missouri branch off of the same racial struggle that African Americans have been fighting for years. Wanting racial equality was a fight back then and is still an issue now.
God and my family are most important to me, and I also believe that everybody should have the same rights and equalities.
Although times were tough, gains were being made. After much pressure, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson authorized the training of black aviation cadets, and soon after the Tuskegee Airmen was born. The Tuskegee pilots fought the German Luftwaffe and were awarded the Air Force's highest commendation. The 761st Tank Battalion and white paratroopers of the 17th Airborne Division together attacked German forces in Battle of the Bulge. This was a victory not only for the U.S. Black WACs like Lucia Pitts felt gratified as her trip home brought together black and white WACs as they formed bonds over their time at Camp Shanks. And one of the biggest accomplishments of all was made by A. Philip Randolph, president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, who threatened President Roosevelt with a march on Washington, D.C., because industry workers refused to hire African Americans. Roosevelt counteracted by issuing Executive Order 8802 in 1941, which banned discrimination in defense industries and also established the Fair Employment Practices Committee to monitor hiring practices. The number of black defense workers increased from 3% in 1942 to 8.3% by November 1944, and wages of African American families increased from 40% to 60% of that of white families. Between 1940 and 1944, black women working in the industry increased from 6.5% to 18%. Still, African Americans received menial jobs, and the gains were small, but they were one step closer to victory. During a time when we needed people the most, we were still Jim Crow, and segregation prevented numerous members of our society to not be able to participate. Although the war ended and it eventually gave rise to the civil rights movement, we still face racial issues in this world today. Near the end of the war, some parts of the color line were broken, but only enough to carry on the demand for civil rights. I strongly encourage you to check out Double Victory by Rana Takaki to learn more about the roles of the many minorities that sacrificed their lives during World War II to engage in the fight for democracy on the home front and off of it. From the refusal of a funeral service to a Mexican-American soldier, to the Navajo code talker who used his native language to communicate secret battle messages, America has long been a country of many cultures, and now is the time to understand where our history stems from.